if that's what's on your mind, then this video it's for you. Right. So let's take a look at what are some examples of KPIs for staff. And but before we get into that, what I like to do is to kind of do a refresher in terms of identifying KPIs and how do you go about doing that itself. And in case you have not reviewed the videos on validity and reliability criteria, make sure you go ahead and do that. Now, so a way that I guide the schools when it comes to writing KPIs is the following. I always get them to focus on a process. And the process goes something like this. So, first and foremost, if you're a staff developer, I would get you to focus on, let's take a look at what is the current level of competency of your staff, right? What is the current level of competencies of your staff? And once we have that, we would then be able to ascertain, what are the learning and development opportunities that you would need to put in place to help them attain that desired level of staff competencies. So, obviously, this staff competency is a result of what we have already ascertained because we are looking at the staff goals as a result, as a derivative of the school goals, right? So this is where we want to say that, well, first you identify, where your staff is at. Then you think about the activities and the opportunities that you want to give your staff to help them develop the competency, the desired competency. Now, once they have the desired competency, you also want to look at what is the level of impact it has on student learning, right? And finally, of course, how does that make an impact on student outcomes? Now, so this, by going through this whole process itself, this is where you are able to think of what are all the different KPIs for each phase. So, for example, at the current staff competency level, you want to identify percentage of staff with learning gaps in key areas. Now, you may have, a small group or a big group of staff with a learning gap in the key areas itself. So you want to ascertain what is that percentage of staff who have this need. And this is going to help you in terms of identifying the learning opportunities. And so you can say that what is the percentage of staff trained in those key areas, right? And finally, at the end of the day, you want to be able to see how many of them are able to actually apply what they have learned. And if they have applied what they have learned and they have implemented it in a effective way, then that should make an impact on student learning outcome. All things, all other things held equal, right? All other things held equal, or all other things held constant. So this is where you want to say that, how are the staff able to apply their learning, and how do we know that it is effective? So impact on student learning. And finally, we also want to look at, what is the impact of the one of the most common requests that I get whenever I conduct this school staff developer induction program is, can you share with us some examples of KPIs for staff? And if that's what's on your mind, then this video is for you. So in this video itself, I'd like to share with you some examples of the KPIs that I work with in terms of schools that are under my guidance when it comes to identifying KPIs. Do take note that this KPIs is just for the schools itself, so it may or may not apply to you. In addition to that, once you understand the process as well as the criteria for crafting KPIs, you would then be able to craft KPIs like this. So let's take a look at this. So previously, we have this example of the school wanting to have a restorative culture. And what they want to see is they want to see, the staff as world class, RP practitioners having the mindset and the skill set in restorative practice. And so, with that as a goal, what kind of KPIs should they be looking at? And if you recall in the last video where we talked about reliability criterion, effectively you have system, staff, student, and school perspective. So in this case here, the SSD, when I work with him, um, there are just two aspects of the KPIs that he wants to look at. So he's looking at one aspect, which is the system perspective. In other words, the number of learning opportunities to develop staff in restorative practice. That's what he's looking at, right? And the other aspect that he is looking at, because just looking at number of learning opportunities is not going to be enough, because that would not automatically make a person a world-class RP practitioner, at least not yet. And so you need the other set of indicator, which is percentage of staff indicating that they are confident in facilitating circle time. So you need to understand the context of the school was that, one of the biggest gap for most of the teacher is the ability to facilitate circle time effectively. And so if they have provided learning opportunities, and learning opportunities include things like training as well as mentoring for their staff. And so, once they have that and teachers are able to say that now I'm confident in facilitating circle time, then that would be deemed as them having a world class RP practitioner, right? Of course, they have other goals and other KPIs that they're looking at, and this is just one aspect of it. Now, let's take a look at another example, and continuing from our earlier example of the school wanting to differentiate learning experiences to meet the different needs of the students. So, what they want to have is they want to have every staff a competent professional who designs differentiated learning experiences. So in this case here, they have already gone through the phase where they are equipping and providing learning opportunities for teachers. So, you know, measuring just the systems perspective itself, it's not going to be their focus. Instead, what they want to do is they want to focus on staff perspective. And these are the set of indicators that they look at. Once again, like I say, this is not in its entirety. They, of course, have other indicators, but this is just some of the ones that I would like to show you. So they're looking at staff, right? Percentage of staff indicating that, designing differentiated learning experience as an area of learning need, right? And they are also looking at percentage of staff able to design differentiated learning experiences for different student segments. So here, as you can see, the emphasis is more on the staff, not so much on the system itself. So there you have it. There are two examples, and each of these example shows you a different way of crafting KPIs. I guess the main point I want to make here is that what you see in one school may make sense for that school because of the context and where they are at. So in your school, what you really want to go about is to think of what is the goal that I really want to measure, and are these indicators valid, and are these indicators reliable? Because if you are able to answer yes to both questions, then what you have is a good KPI. That being said, can it always be improved? Of course, it can be. And this is where I like to challenge you to look at your current set of staff KPIs and ask yourself, what kind of improvements can we make to our current set of KPIs? And once you've done that, I'll see when it comes to target setting, it's just increasing by a couple of percentages points with reference to the previous year, then this video is for you, because I want to share with you the exact way of determining what is the basis for setting targets. Now, setting targets, it's not something that it's a guessing game. It's not something that is just an extrapolation. There are actually bases behind that. And what you need to do, especially as a school staff developer, is that you must be able to articulate what is the basis for setting the targets for your KPIs. And I would just like to mention that the same process can be applied for target setting, for school, for students, and for other goals as well. So when it comes to target setting, essentially you want to ask yourself this question: what is my basis for setting target? Right? And there are three types of basis that you can look at when you are setting target for your KPIs. The first one is what we call historical, and that's looking at past data. So for instance, if you are measuring, the improvement in terms of your school climate over time, you want to look at the improvement of your staff engagement level over time. Then what you want to do is you want to set your target based on historical data. And this is where you kind of look at past performances and you extrapolate and say that, well, if the last 2 years we are at 60%, for example, then what we can anticipate if we do things right and if we implement our strategies effectively and we do the right things, we should be seeing an improvement by 10 or 15% in the subsequent years. So this is where you kind of look back at past data and then try to extrapolate from there. Now, sometimes it may not always make sense to look at historical data, and the reason is because comparing one batch of people with another batch of people may not be a fair comparison. So, as an example, if you are looking at percentage of teachers who are competent and confident when it comes to, carrying out e-learning packages, for instance, looking at past data and comparing, the past cohort of teachers with the current cohort of teachers, that may not be a fair comparison. Instead, what you might want to be looking at is what we call expected basis. And this is where you look at comparative data. Now, comparative data can take two forms. One form is that you are looking at comparative data of comparable schools, right? So, as an example, in your school pick, you have comparable school data that kind of gives you an idea of schools that are comparable to you. Where are they at in terms of their teachers' data and teachers' information, right? So that's one aspect of comparative data. Now, another aspect of comparative data, it could be internal comparison data. Now, what I mean by that is that perhaps you are looking at, in the past, you're looking at this group of teachers who are, implementing innovative projects. And right now, in order for you to set a benchmark for them, you are looking at that comparative data to kind of help you ascertain what is the target that you should be setting. Excuse me. Um, so that's comparative data. And the third type of data that you will be looking at, the third type of targets that you'll be looking at is what we call stretch targets. And this is where you perhaps you want to benchmark against a school or an organization that has got best practices, right? And so this is where you want to be able to say that, well, the targets that you're setting is going to be based on stretch and benchmark data, and that kind of gives you a different level altogether. So what I like you to do is, I like you to go back and look at all the targets that you're setting and to ask yourself for each of those targets, what are the basis for those targets? And then I'll see you in the next video.